Dementia Society of America, Mr. Kevin Jameson. Kevin's going to be joining us tonight and telling us everything he knows on his side of dementia and healthy brain and why it matters.
Absolutely. And Jason, are we ready to go, or you want to say anything else?
I think we're ready to go.
Okay. So first of all, welcome everybody. Really appreciate you having me here today. And I can see some of you, but not all of you. So I appreciate that. Maybe I'll change my screen so I can see more people. Maybe, well, I only see 4 people on the screen. So feel free to add yourself, video wise if you choose to, but you don't have to. But it always helps me because then I know that I'm talking to real people. And so, as Jason said, let me correct you a little bit, Jason. I'm not going to tell you everything I know because we'd be here for days. And I have lots of stories to tell. But what I want to do tonight is really give you kind of a brief overview to dementia, and we're going to touch on brain health as well. So these are real basic things, but I think some of these things may be new to you. So even though you may be a caregiver, a care partner, you might even be experiencing dementia yourself, I just want to make sure that you are fully aware of what dementia is and isn't. And also, by the time we're done today, we have about a little under an hour here, right, Jason? Okay. I'll be able to share with you some additional information about brain health. And I think that that can be pretty powerful. So let's get started. I can't do a show of hands, but I'll just assume that everybody is in some form or fashion a caregiver or a care partner to their loved one. We tend to use the term caregiver later in life and care partner earlier in life. Because as a care partner, when somebody has a cognitive deficit or an impairment of some kind, they're still completely able to do many things. So you're acting together to work out issues. Whereas as dementia progresses, you may be more giving than receiving. There's always some receiving going on, but the relationship does change. So I just want to share with you tonight why I'm standing here in front of you, so you have a little background on why I can even speak to you tonight. The first thing to know is that back in the early 2020s, my wife and I were having marital difficulties. It was challenging. I didn't know what was going on. We'd been married about 20 years, yet something was going on. She was very caustic. She just was really having difficulties in our relationship. And I asked her, basically, could we go see a family therapist? Because I was planning on leaving the relationship. I had gotten a storage locker and I'd moved some of my things out there. So we went to this family therapist. She said yes. And, probably 6 months in, the family therapist pulled me aside and said, Kevin, I think you love her and she loves you. And, but there's something else going on and I can't put my finger on it. And I really didn't know what to do. And she didn't really have any suggestions. Well, one night we went out to dinner at a place called the Indian Spice Grill, and we'd been there before. And we walked in, we sat down. I said hello to the hostess by name. We sat down. Jenny said, "How do you know her?" I said, "Well, from last time. She had an interesting different name. I happen to remember it." And she goes, "I've never been here before." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, what are you talking about? You've never been here before." And no amount of discussing where we sat, what we had for dinner, none of those things tended to solve for her issue that we had never been there. In fact, she said to me, "You must have been here with another woman." And at that point, I knew we had a bigger issue. We had a much, much, much bigger issue. And I just kind of, took myself back several steps and said, "You know what? I can't leave this woman. She is the love of my life. There's something going on. It's not just a marital difficulty, and we got to get to the bottom of it." And that began basically a 10-year trajectory through which she had developed dementia. And at the end of her life, 10 years ago, in 2014, I retired to care for her on hospice, and she died. She died in the summer of 2014. And in that last year of life, I decided to take what I'd learned because I was retired at that point, and I was kind of moving on to my next stage of life. I decided to start the Dementia Society of America. So I am the founder, and I work as a volunteer and have for 11 years. So, what do we do? Why do we do it? So first of all, we do a lot of it because of you, everybody that's on this call. It's very, very important to me to help others that have been in similar situations. And since I've kind of lived it, and I've spoken to thousands and been involved in thousands of other people's lives who've come to us over the years, I think I can share something that may be valuable tonight. So we are going to spend a few minutes talking about what is dementia, because that's really the talk is dementia basics and brain health, right? Those are the two. And so we're going to talk about dementia, what it is, what it isn't, and then we'll kind of wrap up with a brain health discussion. Is that okay with you? Okay, great. So let's get one thing out of the way. This is a biggie, but I think it's important. And that is to say that dementia is not a disease. Now you may say, what are you talking about, Kevin? I mean, my doctor called it a disease. My neighbors call it a disease. I see on the web disease, the disease of dementia, but those are medically incorrect statements. Dementia is not a disease. And so then you have to ask yourselves, what if it's not a disease, what is it, right? And technically, medically, it's what's called a syndrome. And it differs from a disease because a syndrome is a collection of symptoms. So I saw Kay just came back. Kay, you missed the most important thing I wanted to say, and I want you to hear this. Dementia is not a disease. That's a really important concept to get across. And if you say, well, it's not a disease, what is it? It's a syndrome. And what's a syndrome? A syndrome is a collection of symptoms. And that collection of symptoms are caused by an underlying disease. So the easiest way to understand that would be like the difference between a cut and the scab that results from the cut. So if you imagine the cut to be the disease, the scab that is the result of the cut is the dementia. Does that make sense? That's the syndrome part. And you can get a scab from any number of things. You can get a brush burn, you can get an actual cut. A scab might form over some other skin irritation. But at the end of the day, these symptoms altogether are what we call dementia. So if you read even on government websites, if you read home health care agency sites, if you read newspaper articles, you read books, you listen to podcasts, you watch videos, if they're saying that dementia is a disease, they're medically incorrect. So we just kind of got to get that baseline, and you can kind of like ignore what they're saying in terms of that, but that's an important concept to get across. Because most people they don't have an ill intent. They're misinformed, they're not fully informed, but they're not trying to deceive you. What most people think about when they think about dementia is they think about what? Alzheimer's disease. But Alzheimer's disease and dementia are not equal. They are not one and the same. And when we talk about the fact that dementia is a syndrome, it sits up here. It's an umbrella. And under the umbrella is Alzheimer's. Under the umbrella is vascular dementia. Under the umbrella is Lewy body dementia. Under the umbrella is frontotemporal degeneration dementia, and more and more and more. There are over 100 causes of dementia. There are childhood dementias. There are teens and young adults who develop dementia from injury to their head. There are young adults or younger adults, that's anybody under 65. And if they develop a dementia, it's called young onset. Anybody over 65 is late onset. Does that make sense? And you have all these different causes. So you can think about it like flowers. Like flowers is an umbrella as an umbrella term. You got roses, carnations, tulips, violets. Same thing with dementia. You can think about it like cancer. Cancer is the umbrella. If somebody said, I have cancer, I've been diagnosed with cancer, I think your first question might be, what kind? So if they said they had breast cancer, you wouldn't equate that as the same as being lung cancer. They're both cancers, but they're different types of cancer. And the same is true with dementia. The exact same thing is true with dementia. Does that make sense? So Alzheimer's disease has a particular manifestation. It has a particular pathology that is very different than frontotemporal dementia. It's very different from Lewy body. It tends to be different than vascular dementia. One thing that's really interesting to know is that, today, Alzheimer's disease, although people say it's the most common form of dementia, there's two things to know about it. One is that the percentage of people that have Alzheimer's disease as their cause of dementia is actually going down. Now, the numbers of people with dementia is going up, but the percent of people with Alzheimer's is going down. Why would it be going down? It's going down because our medical technology has gotten that much better over the last 10, 15, 20 years, certainly better than it was when my wife was alive. And we can now diagnose dementia much more specifically. So because there are now blood tests, genetic tests, CT scans, PET scans, cerebral spinal fluid tests, skin tests, eye tests. There are all these different tests that are now available that help a neurologist filter out what's going on to come to a better diagnosis. And because they're getting a better diagnosis, the percent of people diagnosed with Alzheimer's is going down. And it was found through a study, what they call a meta-study, which is a very large-scale study, a study of studies, actually, that you've probably heard this 6 million people in America are living with Alzheimer's. That number was derived from a South Side Chicago study done 35 years ago. And every year they've just kind of recalculated the number based on population growth. But what they've actually found is that about 35% of people that are diagnosed with Alzheimer's do not have Alzheimer's disease. They have something else that's causing their impairment, but it's not Alzheimer's disease. And why is that important to you? Because your loved one may already be in a situation where there may have advanced to a certain stage of dementia, is because if they never got the in-depth testing, it would be incorrect to give them an Alzheimer's diagnosis. And why is that important? Because there are different medications, there are different care modalities, certain types of prescription drugs need to be avoided. All of these things can impact the diagnosis of what's actually going on. So I would just say to you that be aware that this is a real thing, that Alzheimer's disease does not equal dementia. One last point on Alzheimer's before we move to some other causes of dementia. Has anybody heard of the Nun study? You can raise your hand. If I see you on screen, that's good. Nun study. I would encourage you to read about the Nun study. It was started in the early 80s by a doctor named Dr. David Snowden. We actually were trying to interview him for something we were doing, and he's long retired, so he wasn't able to do the interview. But the School Sisters of Notre Dame in Mankato, Minnesota, participated in this study. And at the time, around 700 nuns were asked to provide all of their writings to come into the nunnery. So their diaries and their writings throughout their life then as well. They also were asked to donate their brains to the study. So they had 700 nuns. Why do you think they chose nuns? This is St. Elizabeth's, right? Why do you think they chose nuns? Because they had similar habits. Okay, that's a joke.
That was funny. That was funny.
So they have similar habits. They eat similarly, they work similarly, their hours are similar. And what they found was that some of these nuns in their life developed dementia. Some of them didn't. And they wanted to see, by looking at their writings, looking at their level of education, looking what they did throughout their work at the nunnery, and then by looking at their brain when they died, they wanted to compare all of that information. And this is why having Alzheimer's disease does not mean you will develop dementia. So here's what happened. It's amazing, but it's true. So everything in life is a bell curve. You've probably seen that from high school, science class, right? And everything we expect is in the middle of the bell curve. But at the ends of the bell curve, they call them the edges of the bell curve, over here and over here, those are where the rarer things happen. So in the case of the nuns, what they found was that some nuns had no pathology in their brain of a dementia. No pathology, no Alzheimer's, no vascular, no Lewy body, no frontotemporal. Their brains looked somewhat normal. But yet, if you spoke to the nuns who knew them, you'd say, or they would say, that person had dementia. So that's interesting. But what's more interesting is on the other side of the bell curve, right? So now we look at this other side of the bell curve where they looked at the brains of certain nuns in their 90s and over 100 years old and found that these nuns had the pathology of Alzheimer's, had the pathology of vascular dementia, had the pathology of Lewy body, frontotemporal. But everyone around them said they were sharp as a tack until the day they died. What this proves to us is that we can have pathologies that we would typically associate with dementia in our brains, but never express it in our lifetime. And at the end of my talk tonight, in about 20 minutes, I'm going to give you the 2 secrets that they determined, they're not secrets anymore, but the 2 secrets that came out of the nun study, why those nuns probably didn't ever exhibit dementia, and why, and how we can take that information and use it ourselves today. Does that sound good? Okay. So you got to say to yourself, okay, Kevin's told me that dementia is not a disease, it's a syndrome. It's a cluster of symptoms. He's told me that Alzheimer's is going down as a percentage of dementia, but it's still growing because the population's getting older. So just be clear about that. He's also mentioned vascular dementia, Lewy body, frontotemporal. Don't know what those are yet. We're going to talk about them now. And we talked about the fact that you can have a pathology in your brain and not exhibit a cognitive impairment. And those are all very important baseline things to know. Okay, let's turn the page and go a little bit more in depth on what all the four major causes of dementia today. We talked about Alzheimer's quite a bit, but I want to wrap up and just cover that one more time on a couple points. Alzheimer's disease, if it begins in your 40s, 50s, or early 60s, what did I say? It's called early or young. Actually, the word is young onset. To differentiate it from early stage, it's young onset. You can have early stage, young onset, if you choose to say it that way. But people do develop Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia in their 40s and 50s, and certainly their early 60s. Most of that young onset is driven by genetics. Genetics, the genes that we have in our bodies that tell our body how to build our bodies, how to operate our bodies, how to build new cells. So, and there are lots of examples around the world. There's an area in Colombia, South America, where almost everybody develops young onset Alzheimer's because of the genetic component that they all share. And there's a few people in that population that don't. They're trying to study those people. When somebody develops Alzheimer's disease later in life, generally speaking, there's some genetic influence, but it's more likely that it's lifestyle. And that's not to blame anybody. That's just to simply say there are lots of things that happen in our lives that when we get to the age of 65, 75, 85, 95, that may take a toll on our brains. They certainly take a toll on our bodies. Our hair gets gray, our skin starts to sag, we get some wrinkles, may put on a little extra weight. There's tons of things that happen as we age. Our joints ache more. I'm getting a knee replacement. I'm 66. I need this stuff. But at the end of the day, we do age. And so the brain ages. And so as the brain ages, more and more of the things that have happened to us start to accumulate in our brain tissue. And that can end up resulting in a cognitive impairment, which we would call dementia. It can be Alzheimer's disease, which is very specific in that it's a buildup of something called beta amyloid. And you've heard about some of these new drugs that take the amyloid out. Have you heard about those? Leqembi is one of them. Acanumab is another. So there are drugs that have come out recently within the past 2 years that take the amyloid out. And that does take the amyloid out. It's like a sticky residue that gets built up like cholesterol in your bloodstream. The sticky residue gets taken out. But here's the interesting thing. In a pretty significant number of people, it has a relatively minor benefit. So they have people that they've taken this beta amyloid out of their brains, yet they still have a cognitive impairment, and it still gets worse over time. And they're challenged by this, but it can provide some minor relief in some people. The second thing that happens in Alzheimer's disease specifically is that when you get this buildup of this sticky plaque in our brains, the neurons start dying because they're not able to get the nutrients through this sticky plaque. And the neurons start dying, and they turn into what's called neurofibrillary tangles, very medical term. But the neurons start dying, and as neurons start to die, that's when you start to have really severe cognitive challenges. And it's related to a protein called tau, T-A-U. There are some types of dementia that are almost exclusively driven by this tau protein problem, and they're not called Alzheimer's. One of them is called frontotemporal dementia, and it occurs in the front and sides of the brain. So frontotemporal dementia. It does have a genetic component to it in some cases. It does tend to affect men more than women. It does tend to come on earlier in life rather than later in life. Do any of you know who is kind of the most prominent person recently that's been diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia? Anybody want to raise their hand, or Jason, you want to say so?
Is that Bruce Willis?
Right, Bruce Willis. So what happens with frontotemporal dementia? The person has problem with speech. The person can have problem with motor control, and the person typically loses their inhibitions. So they'll swear, they'll take things that they think are theirs, and they're sometimes said to be shoplifting when they do that. They may take their clothes off in public. They may fondle somebody sexually. And a lot of times it happens to men, and men at a younger age. A lot of men are still working in their 50s or 60s, and this can be a problem for them. The next type of dementia is called Lewy body. Lewy was a doctor just like Alzheimer. Lewy saw something different. He didn't see that beta amyloid we talked about. He didn't see the misfolded tau protein, the neurofibrillary tangles. No, he saw something else. Again, early 1900s. What he saw something in the brain tissue that became known as Lewy, his name, Lewy bodies, like bodies of cells, Lewy bodies, bodies of brain cells. These Lewy bodies are also part of Parkinson's disease. And in fact, Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia are on the same spectrum. People with Lewy body dementia will oftentimes develop Parkinson's-like symptoms, and people with Parkinson's disease will develop, in about 35% of cases, will develop, and maybe more, develop dementia, Lewy body dementia. So the two are very closely related, and they're not the same as Alzheimer's. Does anybody know here who the most famous person recently diagnosed with Lewy body dementia? Okay, Robin Williams. Robin Williams. Now, he committed suicide, which is, tragic. But one of the symptoms of Lewy body dementia are terror dreams, dreams what you act out in bed, where somebody might be fighting you or kicking you. and you end up flailing your arms and you can hurt your partner in bed. And the other type of thing that happens are hallucinations. You can see and hear people or things that aren't there. And I guess, we don't really know for sure, how Robin Williams dealt with those things, but those were probably part of his lived experience, and it's a shame that he took that step that he did. But there are certain drugs out there being tested, certain drugs are on the market, and that's why it's important to know whether it's Lewy body or Alzheimer's, or whether it's frontotemporal or Lewy body. It's important to know because the drugs will be different. Some you have to stay away from, some you want to go towards. And the newest drugs are only approved for Alzheimer's. The last one, and probably of the four, is cerebrovascular dementia. And this is extremely prevalent. And I would say, based on all the calls and inquiries we get at the Dementia Society, it could be bigger than Alzheimer's disease. I think the jury's still out on that. It's certainly significant, and here's why. When I tell you what it is, you may agree with me. It comes from mini strokes. Strokes and mini strokes. And these strokes and mini strokes are typically tied to high blood pressure. And there's a lot of cerebrovascular and heart disease across America, let alone, the world, really. But that heart disease and that cardiovascular disease can result in strokes and mini strokes throughout the brain. These mini strokes are so minor that you might not even notice it occurring in somebody. But as they occur throughout the brain, the dementia starts to appear. The cognitive challenges start to appear. And I'm going to argue that there's a lot of cardiovascular disease in America. So I think it's a pretty common one, and we get so many calls and inquiries about it. And a lot of that is tied to diet, mobility, and just general blood pressure, right? Stress management. So I would just encourage everybody who's on this Zoom tonight to really think about that a little bit. Even for me personally, I have no personal cardiac health issues, but I'm very, very attuned. I'm tuned into my risk for stroke because I do have high cholesterol. And the LDL and the HDL, they're all good, but it's still high. So I'm very concerned about getting that under control. So the foods that we eat, the amount of movement that we make throughout the day and week and months, these are all really important factors in cardiovascular health, and they're really important and impactful on your brain's health. And it's very basic, but I'll say it. Whatever is good for your heart is good for your brain. Because your brain needs oxygen from the blood. It's a very energy hungry organ in our bodies. It uses about 20% of the body's energy. Our brain does. So when you've got a brain that needs a lot of oxygen, and you can only live without oxygen for about 3 or 4 minutes. So think about it. The lack of oxygen is a real problem when you have COPD, right? When you have other types of lung conditions, smoker. So these are all related to cardiovascular health, which is related to brain health. So does this make sense to everybody? Say yes, no. Okay, I see yeses out there, so thank you. So I've covered the big four, but there are many, many others, and I just want to touch on the last thing, and make mention that protecting your head is very important. So you can do all the things, eat all the right stuff, exercise well, really have an enriched, educated life. But at the end of the day, if you hit your head on a concrete step, or you're reaching for something, or you're a skier and you get slammed into another skier, or you have a car accident, or you fall off a ladder or fall down the steps, and you hit your head and get a concussion, those types of events are equally risk events for your cognition down the road. Because when that brain gets pummeled in that traumatic brain injury, it inflames. And there's really no easy way to lower the inflammation without, a good therapeutic program to do that. So that's why young football players are getting concussions and are developing dementia, called CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. Race car drivers, so older football players, people that fall, people that hit their head, people that have car accidents. And that's what happened to my wife. My wife had a car accident in April of 2001. And I didn't see it right away. It was a major accident. She got hit in the head. She was T-boned at an intersection. And I didn't see it. She didn't see it. Nobody saw it coming, but within a year or two of that accident, she started to develop the signs of what we now call a dementia, or a cognitive impairment for sure. And it just developed into the full-blown dementia. Let's touch on MCI, minor cognitive impairment. Have you heard of MCI? What's important to know is MCI is not dementia. And a lot of us have MCI, especially as we age. There is normal aging where we do have changes to our cognition. We will think more slowly. We'll have a harder time retrieving words. We'll have a harder time following directions. Some of these things are just natural, the aging process. It's like if you put a tractor out in the field, somewhere in Kansas, somewhere in Missouri, eventually that tractor rusts and rusts and rusts until it falls into the ground. That's life. We are rusting, whether we like it or not. And our brains are doing that as well. The real issue is, how are we compared to others of similar age, similar physical health, similar educational background? That's what makes normal versus a minor cognitive impairment. If you're amongst your peer groups and you're having similar issues, there's not too much worry. We may always want to improve our brain health. It's when you're not doing as well as your peer group. MCI may or may not become dementia. In about 30 to 40% of cases, it can progress to dementia if unchecked. In those cases, what dementia means, if you go and look at, let's say, a long-term care policy, your activities of daily living require assistance. So the medical definition is one or more activities of daily living plus some other executive function issues. That qualifies as dementia. But if you were to try to enact your long-term care policy, they will probably say 2 activities of daily living plus the other cognitive issues. So bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, transferring, and so forth, those are activities of daily living. And if you're unable to complete one or more of those without assistance from somebody, then you can start to say that that cognitive impairment is severe enough that we might call it dementia. Make sense? So MCI can stay kind of where you are. When I told the joke about the nuns and that they had similar habits, some of you laughed right away. Some of you, it took a little longer. So we have different brains, and our brains process things at different speeds, and we have different life experiences. So one person's minor cognitive impairment is nothing to the other person. It's like, that's how I am every day. I've always been leaving my keys somewhere else. But the person who always knew where their keys were at all times, but then starts to forget where they are and put them in different places, that might be something to be concerned about. And of course, you need to get to a doctor or doctors, medical professionals, and get a workup, get a cognitive assessment done. Okay, in the remaining 10 or 15 minutes, what I'd like to do is shift gears a little bit, because I've given you the dementia basics. You now know it's not a disease. You now know it's not Alzheimer's, all Alzheimer's. You know there's 4 major causes and many, many others. You know to protect your head. You know what MCI is, and you know that it's different than dementia, but it can lead to dementia in certain cases. And you also know that we all age. So now the question is, and I'm sure you know that, but now the question is, what about brain health? What can I do today for myself or for my loved one? Somebody who is living with dementia, living with a cognitive impairment, can I do anything for them today that's going to help them? And what I'm about to share with you are ideas that you can utilize with anybody. We are not going to reverse Alzheimer's disease. And you will see ads on Facebook, you'll see, ads in the paper, come listen to how we're going to reverse Alzheimer's, or we've reversed Alzheimer's, or, oh my gosh, the study we did showed we reversed Alzheimer's. You know what? There's been billions of dollars spent in drugs to combat Alzheimer's. And if you're going to listen to somebody because of a postcard saying that they've reversed Alzheimer's and they want you to come out for a steak dinner to learn about how, that's a warning sign. That's a warning sign. Nobody has proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that they can reverse these pathologies and permanently improve or reverse the cognition. And those are 2 different things. That's why it's always important to know that dementia is not a disease, because going back to the nun study, you can have the pathology but not exhibit dementia, and vice versa. Okay. So what can you do to better your life, to better your brain? We call it Better Brain Nation. So we have a magazine called Better Brain Nation. You can sign up to get a subscription on our website, dementiasociety.org. That's a I'm promoting myself. It's self-promotion, sorry. But here are the 2 secrets from the nun study. The first is cognitive reserve. And you have to ask yourself, what's cognitive reserve, Kevin? Cognitive reserve, the way I like to look at it, is it's the difference between having a thin dictionary and a thick dictionary. A thin dictionary, you don't have as many words available to you, experiences, phrases, ideas, concepts, because your life experience or your formal education even might have been limited. So you might have a thin dictionary. Doesn't mean you can't operate in the world, doesn't mean you're not smart, doesn't mean you can't be a fantastic entrepreneur or somebody that's run a household or any of those things. No, no, no. It just simply means that your dictionary is thinner than thicker. And a thicker dictionary is again compared to a great deal of cognitive reserve. So you have cognitive reserve like a big gas tank versus a little gas tank. With a big gas tank, you can go further. You can drive through the cornfields for hours longer than if you have a small gas tank. And the same is true with our brains. So to get that bigger gas tank, to get that bigger cognitive reserve, how do we do it? We do it through education. We do it through learning. We do it through experiences. We do it through social interactions. We do it through deciding to be curious. So when we add to our dictionary and we have more words, phrases, ideas, concepts, and experiences to deal with, you can imagine that the brain has more to draw from when there is a pathology. That's the nun at 100 who was sharp as a tack, but had the brain of somebody with a dementia. Why? Because that nun had a lifelong set of experiences and educational experiences, and she was probably curious enough that she built up her cognitive reserve to the point where the pathology didn't matter. There was still enough brain power there to work around the pathology. Does that make sense? So this cognitive reserve, think about it as a big dictionary. How do you build it today? You build it today by having experiences, by reading, by becoming educated, taking a class, doing something to better yourself, traveling. Fantastic if you can travel. And even if travel is to the next county, if travel is to the next town, but exposing yourself to new experiences more often. If you always have a bologna sandwich, try tuna fish on rye. If you only watch Fox, watch MSNBC. If you only go to the giant supermarket, go to the big boy supermarket or whatever it's called. In other words, expand your horizons. And it's closely linked to the next secret, number 2. And that is neuroplasticity. So by having all these additional experiences, neuroplasticity is the ability to use those experiences to do new and novel things, and vice versa. Doing new and novel things builds your cognitive reserve. But what's a great example of neuroplasticity? I'm right-handed. If I can force myself to put the pen in my left hand and write, that's building brain cells, believe it or not, because it's forcing my brain to do what I normally do, but do it differently. If I normally pick up a cup with my left hand and I start picking it up with my right hand, that's neuroplasticity. If I cross my arms when I'm talking to somebody, this is my natural stance. I'm going to cross them the other way. Ooh, feels weird. That's neuroplasticity. We see neuroplasticity at work in the Special Olympics. People are shooting crossbow, they're running track, they're doing pole vaulting, right? But they don't have arms, they don't have legs, they have one leg, they have one arm, right? They may have no legs. They're doing basketball in a wheelchair. That's the power of neuroplasticity. It's being able to work around the problem in such a way that you can still accomplish something, but you do it differently than maybe what you did do in the past. So a great example of this with somebody who is living with dementia is to try some music. But, give them some music that they love. Frank Sinatra, the Bee Gees, Motown, a gospel song. But then introduce every once in a while something they don't know and see how they react to that. A little Uptown Funk, right? A little Vivaldi, and get that impression on them. What's going on when they hear that new music? So there are ways to reach people who are still very reachable despite the dementia, and we do believe that to the dying day somebody is reachable. Touch of the hand, their name spoken, just being present with somebody. These are all ways to be in that person's presence and in the moment with that person. And that is a benefit to them. And it's a benefit to you too. So with that, we're almost at our hour up. So I'm just going to open it up. Jason, if you don't mind, if anybody wants to ask a question, they can either chat and you can tell me, or if somebody wants to unmute, you're certainly welcome to unmute. But I just want to thank you before we take any Q&A and say, this has been fantastic to have you with me tonight and me to be with you. Very valuable. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kevin, for taking the time and being a part of this and shedding light onto dementia. Does anybody have any questions for Kevin?
I left one in chat.
Hey, Pat.
I left one in chat before you even started, and I really need help with that. It's a pretty long question, so I put it directly to you.
All right. Well, listen, if any of you would like to, ask a question, we just go to our website. We have a contact page there. It's pretty easy to find, and just fill the form in and ask your question. We'll be able to answer it. And we'll also send you a package of our free dementia education information, and that we do all of that at no charge. We are supported exclusively by individual donors and small businesses. We don't take government funding. We don't have a big funder, giving us a foundation, giving us money. We're primarily volunteer driven. So we really are here to serve you. And, we want to provide as much as we can, given the funds that we get, to help other people understand what dementia is and isn't. And we also are interested in making sure your brain health is top notch. Will you send it via the post office? Email overload. Absolutely. We do not email it at all. We are old school. Yeah, you just give us that information when you go to the contact form, your name, address, and everything in that form. You'll see the fields for it. And we send you out a big, thick package of information for all free. Thank you, Pat. Jason, anybody else? Anything else?
Anybody else?
Okay. Well, like I said, anybody can reach out to us directly. Come to our website. You can look at all the different types of dementia. We have something called the Big Umbrella. Big Umbrella. This is a booklet you can get free of charge. And it's a 16-page guide to dementia and brain health and care planning. So this is all free of charge. All the information is very colorful. It's easy to read. You can read it online if you want, but you can also get a printed out copy. And it's all going to explain to you all the different aspects of dementia, as well as care planning and brain health. Also, it tells you about how a doctor's visit might go and so forth. K2.
How often do you do these Zoom?
We do them on request, and you know, so this was something that we did on request.
Okay,
And just for everybody that may not know anything about St. Elizabeth's, we do feature a different speaker every month, the third Thursday of every month. So it changes. So just follow us on our website and under the speaker series, and it will list next month and all the way through the next 5 or 6 months on our website as well.
Kevin, you mentioned your website and you mentioned some kind of page. Is that on here? Because I don't remember seeing anything.
That's okay. Yeah, dementiasociety.org.
Okay.
And then depending on if you're on a phone or a PC, if you're on a phone, you go to the upper right and it drops down like a list of things and you just pick contact. Hit the contact and that's our form. If you're on a PC, everything's across the top of the screen. You hit contact and you get a form.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Very easy to navigate. And if you sign up for our email newsletter, it just comes out once a month. We're not asking for a donation in generally speaking, maybe once or twice a year we do. But generally speaking, we don't ask for donations in the email or, you know, oh, we need 3 times more money. We need another $50. We need another $100. I'm like, no, we don't do that. So don't be concerned about that. It's just really solid, great information, and it's all provided at no charge. Well,
Thank you
listen,
again.
it's 9 o'clock where I am, so I'm ready for Betty by Bo. And I really appreciate everybody having been on the call. And Jason, thanks for organizing it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. You were very clear in your explanation, and my husband has number 4, so I thought you explained it very clearly.
Great. Well, I'm so happy to have helped and be a clear speaker. All right, take care. Have a great night tonight.
Thank
Bye,
you. You
everybody.
too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.